Hey guys, this is Ben with Trucked. Today we're going to walk you through what to look for when purchasing a bed rack. Whether you buy one of our racks or one of our competitors, what we want to do is give you guys the most information to make the best decision possible. So to get into that, the first thing to look for when you're purchasing a bed rack is what material it's made out of. Whether that's steel, stainless steel, aluminum, cast aluminum, extrusion. These are all things you want to look for. A lot of cases, materials can be used for different applications in the build of the rack. As an example, we use extruded crossbars with stainless steel uprights and bar end brackets, and then sheet aluminum 3/16 5052 aluminum for a lot of the other components. So when you're looking for a bed rack, steel is a great material. It's very structural, very strong. There's different grades and different thicknesses. So what you want to look for is you want to look for the gauge of the metal. You don't want anything smaller, and gauges are a little bit different. They are, the bigger the number, the thinner it is. So the smaller the number, the thicker it is in terms of steel gauge. So we use 10 gauge steel, stainless steel for our racks. But if you're looking for, if you're comparing other racks, 11 gauge can work just fine. It's a little less strong than what we make, but 11 gauge is good. Anything bigger, number wise, thinner than 11 gauge is something to kind of watch out for. The other thing to look at is also what grade aluminum, if the rack is made out of aluminum. You want to see what gauge or what grade the aluminum is. There's different thicknesses, just like steel. There's different thicknesses for aluminum. 1/8" aluminum is about the thinnest you want to see anything made out of that's structural. We use 3/16 aluminum, and we don't use that aluminum for very structural components. We use it for decorative or connecting components that aren't taking the majority of the stress from the rack. So when you're looking at aluminum, you want to make sure that it's not 3000 series. 3000 series is very formable, very bendable. It's great under a press brake, but it's not going to add the structure you need for a bed rack. So 5000 series is what we use. 6000 is the next tier up. But the word of caution around 6000 series is it's not well suited to sheet metal forming. So when you bend a 6000 series piece of aluminum, you can get cracks at the end. So that's the quick and dirty on materials. So the next category to talk about is adjustability. There's a lot of different racks out there. Most racks are fixed in terms of the rack build. This can be good. It's a simpler build. It can lead to a cheaper rack, which if budget's a concern, that can be a good thing. But what that does do is it really limits how you build out your rack for your specific needs. We went through a lot of different design iterations when we built our racks, and we wanted to give our customers the most adjustability possible. And the reason we went that direction is when you're setting the height of your rack, our racks are adjustable every 2 inches in height. So when you're setting the height of your rack, you're trying to work around, your rear view mirror sometimes camera systems. Sometimes you need to get your load just over a roof rack or over the roof or shark fin antenna in general. So we added a lot of adjustability in the height of our racks to really work for the most applications. The other reason you want adjustability, the other type of adjustability is length adjustability. Most racks in the market are not length adjustable. Ours is every 2.5 inches in length if you're using one of our accessory panels. If you're not using our accessory panels, it's a little bit more freeform. But the length adjustability is important because when you work with other gear, such as tonneau covers or toppers, those products mount into the bed, and typically where they mount will affect how you set up your bed rack. So, most other racks are not compatible with those types of products. Ours is, and that's one of the big reasons our racks are a little bit different. But that adjustability, the length adjustability, is really meant to work with those types of parts. There's a couple other racks in the market that are adjustable like ours, and it's we think it's good design, and hats off to those guys who are trying to make a good product too. So anyway, the next key component here that we want to talk about are load ratings. Load ratings is a little bit of a loaded discussion. So load ratings are, no matter what rack you're looking at, whether it's ours or others, load ratings are super important. You want to make sure that the load ratings are published. If a rack that you're looking at does not have published load ratings, you should just write it off immediately because the company's not standing behind the product. Load ratings are very, very, very important to look at. Static load rating, there's two types. There's static and dynamic load ratings. Static load ratings are important for like thinking about when you're stopped and you're at camp, or in general, that's where it makes the most, has the most effect. But when you're stopped is what your static load rating is. So for us, our racks are rated 1,000 pounds static load rating. We've actually tested well over 1,000 pounds on the racks, and everything's held up pretty darn well. We actually have another video on our YouTube you can check out to see us. We actually we jacked up my Tacoma and set it down on a couple of the rack components just to see what would happen. So we actually had double our rated weight on the racks, which we don't recommend anybody else doing, but we wanted to show just how strong the system is. So I say that to say when you're shopping for racks, you want to know that the rack's actually been tested to the limits. Ask the other companies, if you're considering other companies, ask them, how did you come up with this specific rating? A lot of companies will tell you, we did some FEA analysis in the computer, which is a good answer. FEAs, for those who don't know, is finite element analysis. It's a way to use their CAD system to determine the strength of their designs. As somebody who's been in product development for over a decade, FEA is a great kind of first step, but nothing beats an actual test. So the best companies who are doing it the right way are the ones who actually test their products. So the other type of rating is a dynamic load rating. Dynamic load ratings are basically what's the rating of your rack when you're going on the road, sometimes on a trail. The way we rate our racks, we rate our racks at a 250-pound dynamic load rating. So what that means, and that's the off-road, doing the toughest trail in Moab or wherever your favorite trails are. They're rated at 250 pounds for extreme conditions. So dynamic rating is just the weight on your rack while you're driving. That's important if you're carrying materials, carrying tents, carrying kayaks, although those typically don't actually reach your total rating. But for overlanders, it's really important. That total amount of weight on your rack while you're driving is something to keep an eye on. From our experience, I mentioned our worst case scenario, you're going down a very, very tough trail, is 250-pound dynamic load rating. In our testing, we've had well over 400 pounds on a rack. And what we notice isn't the rack having any issues. We notice that most truck beds do not handle more than 400 pounds very well. There's a couple exceptions to that. There's a couple racks on the market that tie into the frame of the truck. Those could potentially handle more weight. There's a couple racks that use longer bars that basically cover the entire bed sides. That could make a small difference, but it's not going to make a huge difference in what your load capacity, your dynamic load rating is. From our testing, like I said, 400 pounds is about the max you want to see in a load rating. We do not recommend going that high, especially if you're doing very tough trails. So moving on, that's the key points in load ratings. Something else to look at when you're looking at bed racks is, can you move your rack from one truck to another truck? Maybe you don't mind buying another rack down the road, but I know from our preference is you buy one rack and you want to make that investment last as long as possible. Most people buy trucks. Most consumers in the U.S. buy a vehicle and they keep it, I think, on an average of like 3 to 5 years. Some of us in the overland market, we like keeping our trucks and vehicles longer, but that's about the average. So what you want to consider when buying a bed rack is, can your rack go from one truck to another truck? Most trucks, or most racks, once they're built for a truck, that's that. You're really not going to be able to adjust or move your rack from one vehicle to another. Our racks are designed so that in the worst case scenario, say you're going from a smaller truck to a larger truck, you may have to get longer crossbars, and potentially a different mounting, a bed attachment system. So that's a maybe a couple $100 instead of buying a whole new rack, which could cost you potentially thousands, especially if you've added a bunch of accessories and built out the rack kind of to fit your needs. So something to look for, just check to see if the rack if it's possible to move it from, a Tacoma to an F-150 or a Tundra or whatever your preference is. That's just something to think about in the long-term longevity of your rack. The next category is, what accessories are available for your rack. A lot of the big companies, we're a small company. We do our best to have a solution to carry whatever you want to carry. We've got tie-down points, mounted ratchet straps, kayak carriers. We have our own tent brackets. We work with Vanultra too, who makes a really awesome tent bracket. We have accessory panels to carry, rotopacks or mounts for high lifts, or anyway, there's tons and tons of accessories out there. When you're looking for racks, just keep in mind, what do you want to put on your rack? What might you want to put on your rack in the future? How versatile or how changeable is the system, or is the design to make it really kind of work for your needs now and then grow with you as you continue to get more into the hobby, or maybe you've got a business landscape or something that you want to kind of build the racks out, maybe for a fleet of your trucks. So accessories are really important to be flexible. So, I kind of mentioned briefly our accessory panels. Our accessory panels use the same pattern across the whole panel, and they're designed to work with some length adjustment, which we talked about earlier. A lot of companies that you may find, they have very specific mounting locations for certain gear. So they're kind of pushing you towards a very specific setup, which can be fine if that's the setup that you want to run. But if you want flexibility, you want to look for racks with accessories that still allow the maximum amount of flexibility possible, which is why we designed our accessory panels with that same pattern across the whole panel, including the mounting area to the uprights. So that's something to look for. Just make sure that the company that you end up choosing has the accessories to mount the gear that you want to mount in the way that you want to mount it. The next category here is upgradability. Upgradability is another really important point. People's lives change. You get into new hobbies, you make different decisions. In a lot of cases, what we found in a couple of years now being in business is that, we've seen customers who bought a rack system, and, they started out, all they wanted to do was mount a rooftop tent to it. But maybe a year after they bought the rack, they decided, hey, I'm getting into this kayaking thing or paddleboarding, and I need a taller rack. So with a lot of companies, that means either selling or throwing away or storing your old rack and buying a taller option. And then that taller option is going to be, your new rack. You have to, like I said, you have to sell or do something else with the old one. With our company, with Truck, what we've really tried to build is a system that you can upgrade. So say you buy one of our 12-inch racks and you want to upgrade it to an 18-inch rack, which would be great. Say you got into kayaking and you need opportunity to run longer kayaks that kind of bend up over the cab of the truck. To upgrade from a 12-inch rack to an 18-inch rack, all you have to do is upgrade the uprates for our system, and you have to add the front to back connectors. This works from a 6-inch rack to a 12-inch rack. You can upgrade an 18-inch rack to a 24-inch rack with just the only change you need to make is the bar end brackets. So thinking about upgradability is something you want to think about. Is the rack upgradable? Not just in terms of what you can put on it, but in terms of structure. The other reason we see people upgrade from one height rack to another, in a lot of cases, is they may start with a soft shell, a little bit cheaper version of a rooftop tent. They take that rack and then, maybe they've really gotten into overlanding. They've really gotten a lot of use out of the soft shell tent, and they're like, we want to upgrade to a hard shell, either wedge style or clamshell style tent. If you go to a wedge style tent, they're a lot longer. They can be 80. The one I just looked at this morning was 88 inches long. If they're that long, for most cases, unless you have a super long bed, for most of those cases, you're going to want to move the tent up high enough so it gets over the cab of your rack. It's a good time to bring up the point. If you are looking in the market and you see racks designed to basically look really nice, to work with a roof rack. Say you want your bed rack to line up with a roof rack. While it looks good when there's nothing on it, what we've really noticed is that's really not a very useful design, because your truck bed, the bed moves independently of your cab. So it's, under the truck, there's a frame. That frame twists as you go over bumps. And the cab is mounted separate from the bed, so the cab moves independent. So what that means is you really don't want anything touching the cab rack and the bed rack at the same time, because you could end up with damage. So in a lot of cases, like I said, while those designs look really, really good, the functionality isn't great, because you have to get risers or other parts to raise anything on the bed rack up above the roof rack. So what we did with our racks is our racks are designed to go up high enough that they clear roof racks in most cases. So you don't have that worry anymore. Anyway, that's just another word of caution. The last category we want to talk about is just the hardcore engineering principles behind a lot of bed racks. A lot of racks, you really want to think about the structural engineering behind the rack. And the things that we see in the market that we want to make sure that you look out for are, the number one thing is looking for bolts in shear. What that means is bolts are designed to work in a tensile, basically in tensiles. So they're a lot stronger when you take the head of the bolt and the end of the bolt and you pull them. That's tensile strength. That's the way you want your bolts to work. If there's shear force on a bolt, that shear force means basically the forces are going perpendicular to the length of the bolt. Most cases in bed racks, we see single shear joints. Single shear joints are just very susceptible to cracking and breaking the bolt, which if you've got a lot of weight and you're going down a hard trail, that stress over time can lead to failure. So when you're looking for, if you do see a rack and you look at the design of it and you see a bolt and there is shear force on it, you want to look for double shear, which means there's basically two holes in a single hole, and in order to break, it'd have to shear in two places instead of one. But the best way to get around that is just to not have any shear forces and bolt everything in tensile strength. So that's what we did on our rack. Our racks are designed to use in most of the cases, all the bolts are designed to work in tensile strength. So on our bar end brackets, we bolt in 3 dimensions. There's 2 on the bottom and 2 on each side, and they clamp it all together in 3 dimensions. And it's not shear force; it's tensile strength. We're using the tensile strength of the bolt to hold it all together. There's also a floor on the bottom that the crossbar sits in. So it's, even if bolts came undone somehow, that floor is keeping it all together. We do use in where the uprights attach to the bar end brackets. Some people might say, "Hey, well, that's a shear joint," but what it is we designed that specific part to be what's called a face mount. So we're using the tensile, the basically how tight we pull the 2 pieces of metal together. We've got a nice big square. It's about 2 inches wide by about maybe 3.5, 4 inches tall, where we were sandwiching 2 pieces of metal together. There's a lot of surface area between those. It's a textured surface. So what we're doing is we're using the tensile strength of the bolt to pull those 2 faces together and create what's called a face mount. So all the stress of the joint is actually going through the faces and not the bolts. In most cases, you'll see a lot smaller surface area between those in shear joints, but that's how we're working with that specific part. We also use, in conjunction to that shear face, we use positioner pins. So then it's transferring weight in 3 dimensions once again. The other thing to look at from engineering perspective is you want to look at what hardware you're using and how it's being bolted together. So in a lot of cases, there are a lot of companies bolt in, they use their extrusion profile. There's 2 holes in the middle of the extrusion, and they bolt the brackets or parts basically into the end of the extrusion. There's a bunch of different brands that do it. The downside of this design is that aluminum is a soft metal. In most cases, the companies are using stainless steel bolts. The stainless steel bolts, you run into the first problem you run into is a dissimilar metals issue. So when stainless touches aluminum, you have 2 potential issues. The first is galvanic corrosion. If there's any kind of small electrical current, it can start eating away at the aluminum. And that over time will deteriorate, and then your rack could potentially come undone. The other issue is galling. So when those 2 materials touch and they're screwed together, it creates a lot of friction, and it can make the material gall, which means when you go to undo the rack, take it apart, adjust something, that screw may get stuck. It may not come out. You may break the head off, and you have a piece of a screw stuck in the end of the extrusion. A few companies do use helicoils in the end, which basically what that means is they've threaded the end of the extrusion, and they've run basically a coil, looks like a spring, into the threaded tap, or the tapped hole. And that material, that spring, is made out of usually the same material as the screw, so stainless steel. That's a better way to do things, but it's still not optimal compared to a different type of joint. The other issue you run into with aluminum threaded holes is you're using a very hard screw and a very soft metal. If you get it in wrong, it's very easy to cross thread that, and then you've got to replace that part. We've talked to a lot of people in the past who've had these issues with other racks, and that's why we decided to make ours a little bit different. Those are the main engineering features that we implement with our racks. Those are things to look out for on others. I think I've tried to give you guys as much info as I can. So if you have any questions about any of these topics, feel free to reach out to us. Our number is listed down below in the written description of all this. It's also on our website in a bunch of different places. You can also text us in the chat on the bottom right of the screen. If you're on a desktop, if you're mobile, I think it's in the same spot. So hopefully this gives you all the information you need to make a wise decision purchasing a bed rack. Obviously, we hope you choose Truct. We're a small company based here in Pittsburgh. Everything's made here in Pittsburgh or close locally. Happy shopping and get Truct.